Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our next series in our Mocs Move Forward, a discussion and application of diversity in healthcare, education, and our community. My name is Dr. Shawani Howard-Baptiste. I'm an associate professor here at UTC and interim program director for the Masters in Public Health. And it is truly my pleasure and honor to have a group of wonderful people who serve our community and our state and beyond. And so the first thing I'm going to do is allow our guests to introduce themselves. We'll start with Miss Stacy Lightfoot and then Dion Jenkins, and then we'll have Jonathan Butler. So if you could just introduce yourself and then provide a little bit of information about yourself in terms of how you got to do DEI work, diversity, equity, and inclusion. All right, so we'll start with Miss Lightfoot.
Hello, I'm Stacy Lightfoot, Vice President of College and Career Success Programs at the Public Education Foundation. And my role and passion, my role at PEF and passion to fill equity gaps around and in the college and career success space comes from my experience coming up through public education and understanding the information that a lot of public students do not get that lead them to best fit post-secondary institutions. So the work that I do really is about closing equity gaps for Black, Brown, and low-income students and helping them connect to really great places and really great careers after they graduate from high school. Those populations of students are the ones who face the biggest barriers to college and career success. So my work at PEF seeks to close those gaps and provide and create the opportunities for students.
I am Dion Jenkins. I serve as Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion for Tennessee Valley Federal Credit Union. Prior to this role, I was president of the Bessie Smith Cultural Center, which focuses on African Americans in the Chattanooga community. So doing the work of diversity and inclusion for African Americans within our community, when I was approached by the CEO of the credit union and asked to start a D&I program for the credit union. So I've been in this role for 3 years now, and it was a brand new position when I started. And just the work that I've done in the community through serving on boards that focus on the lives of women specifically, serving on in social capacity, focusing on women of color and young girls of color. So that's really where I spend the majority of my time and passion. And in this role, I am doing the work of community engagement, recruitment, and retention, and making sure that the products and services that we offer through financial services are open to everyone in the community, making sure that the organizations that we sponsor focus on everyone in the community, and then looking at our staff internally and trying to get it to reflect the community in which we serve. So that's been very important and an integral part of what I do now in this role.
Well, it's great and humbling to follow people like Dion and Stacy, people that are great friends of mine. My name's Jonathan Butler. I'm what we call an equity manager for the city of San Antonio. We have an office of equity in which we really focus on normalizing, organizing, and operationalizing equity in city government. I come to this work after 20 some odd years of doing racial and social justice work in various capacities. I've done a lot of work actually with universities, going back all the way to my college days at Emory University as a student organizer and a member then of what we call the President's Commission on the Status of Minorities. All the way till now. I think now in many ways, my diverse experience as a lawyer, as a person who has done everything on work on the restoration of voting rights for formerly incarcerated individuals, to work that we've all done in community together at various sectors, whether it be the type of work Dion used to do with the Bessie Smith cultural system and the ways in which we intersected, or many of our connections to the Urban League of Greater Chattanooga area. Stacy and I served, and Dion as well, on the Chancellor's multicultural advisory council there at UTC. So in many ways, I'm very connected to you all in your community. And I'm glad to be here with you all today.
Awesome. Well, thank you to our esteemed guests and to our students who are joining us. So welcome. The first question I wanted to address to the panel is, a lot of times we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and oftentimes I see a slash as though we can just kind of interchange those words as though they mean the same thing. So this would be open to anyone in the panel. How is your organization, or how are you defining diversity, equity, and inclusion?
So I don't mind being the first to take a stab at that. What I find in this work is when most people hear the word diversity, they automatically think race, as if that's the only part of what diversity focuses on. And there are so many aspects of diversity. Everything about us is diverse. So you look at socioeconomic status, education, your household. Are you married, single? Do you have children? So it's everything about us. It's every dimension that makes us who we are. When you talk about equity, I'll use an example in financial services. Creating an equitable program versus something that is equal is really important to understand and differentiate. So if you have let's say you have two families trying to purchase a home, and they both need $10,000 as a deposit, as a down payment on that home. If I have a program that gives each eligible family $5,000, but family A already has $8,000 and family B only has $2,000, equality says they both get $5,000. So family A has enough to buy a home, and then $3,000 worth of money left over to buy furniture for that home. And family B is still short. So equity says I give family A $2,000 to meet their $10,000, and family B, I give them $8,000, and now they're both able to purchase a home. And I think it's important that people understand that difference between equity and equality. And then with inclusion is really about being valued, respected, and supported. It's having everyone at the table, having their voices heard, and being respected in what they have to say, because we all have something to contribute and we're all coming from a different place.
Mm-hmm.
So understanding that inclusion is really about that value, that respect, and that support that you provide to individuals is really important, I think, for everyone to understand in this DEI work.
I love that illustration. And Jonathan, you're going to add?
Yeah, Dion's, the way we talk about it, we use the great scholar Werner Meyer's example of talking about if we had a dance party, we think about diversity as the people who would be there, right? Who's coming to the party. We think about inclusion as, do they have a sense of belonging? Do they actually feel like they've been invited to dance? Do they feel like they can participate? And I love the way Dion put it in terms of thinking about equity. When we talk about it in the city of San Antonio, we like to talk about it as, well, who's making the decisions and how are we allocating the resources? And then who's picking the music, and do people feel like they are participants in the process, right? And then we have an excellent diagram that we use from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation that is this series of bicycles, and this idea based on building on Dion's example about equality. Equality is just giving everybody the same bike, right? Doesn't matter if you are 4'2" or 6'2", or whether you have some mobility challenges, or whether you're a child, you just all have the same bike. And when we think about equity, we're talking about how do we make sure that we account for people's needs in the bike that they have, and the resources that they have, and the ways in which they are distributed. So a child's going to need a different size bike than an adult who is taller. A person who might have other mechanisms of, thank you for including the example, a person who has some mobility challenges might need an accessible, adaptable mode of travel, excuse me, transportation. And so I like to think about it that way. Or if I were talking with my mom gives a great example. She says, you know, when you were growing up, you and your brother weren't treated the same because you both had different needs, right? I talked to you differently than him because you needed something different than he needed. And so if we think about equity, how do we make decisions based on where people's needs are?
Mm. We talk about that certainly in public health, whether it's the social determinants of health or in health and healthcare, meeting people where they are. In order to make equitable choices, we have to understand where people start. Stacey, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, you know, this is interesting. I've been in the world of nonprofit for almost 25 years. And, you know, a nonprofit, you see where the needs are and you create the thing to meet the need, right? So for the work that I do at the Public Education Foundation, students in public schools, 15 or 20 years ago, were not getting adequate information to make informed decisions about going to college. So you create a mechanism by which students are now getting information and are going to college now at the same rates as their white counterparts, their middle class counterparts, their upper middle class counterparts. So, you know, for me in the world of nonprofit, it's creating whatever it is to fill the gap so that students have the same to make the same kinds of decisions. And I also like to define, you know, equity. You know, and this is to a point that you made just a few seconds ago, Dr. Howard Baptiste. It's meeting someone where they are,
Mm-hmm.
caring about how they got there, and then giving them the tools and the resources to help them go farther. Right. So understanding that people are starting the race at different places, understanding and caring about their story, to know how to provide the help and the support, and then giving them the help and the support that they need based on their own situation and circumstance, and understanding not everyone needs the same thing, to Jonathan's point. Not everyone, I mean, understanding not everyone needs the same amount, to Dion's point. And so 25 years ago, 30 years ago, when we were all in college, you know, diversity was about color, right? It was about Black, white, Hispanic. Oh, wait, it was about geographic diversity when you talk about, you know, colleges and college entrance and what colleges are looking for to build their freshman class or to build their class. But something that you said that stuck with me, Jonathan, a while ago is you can't have equity without diversity and inclusion. You can't have inclusion without diversity and equity, right? You can't have equity and inclusion without diversity. And so it's all of those things kind of dancing together. But it really is truly about understanding someone's story and giving them what they need. It's what it is. The person with no legs, right, needs the apparatus to walk on the same sidewalks that everyone can benefit from. So it's about ability, it's about education, it's about workforce needs, it's about a bunch of things.
And Dion said something too, Dr. Howard Baptiste, that I think is worth emphasizing again. This idea that somehow in people's minds, I think they co-opt and they conflate diversity and equity, and they think it's about race. And if I drill down even farther, I think most people think it's about Black folks, right? And they use it now, it's become a wedge issue to again attempt to divide people in a society. When people are attempting to think critically about problem solving and progress, Dion can give you a lot of economic data that tells you why diversity is good for business. And to her point, it's not just about race, it's about all types of diversity, but racial diversity. I just so happen to deal and work in a space where I'm talking about racial, economic, social equity. Those are the types of things that I'm talking about. Yeah, so I am centering some of my decision making on race. And you, as a public health expert, know better than most, there are all types of data points that we use to make the decisions on what we focus and center on. For us, we are using data to suggest that racial disparities and economic disparities are driving everything from poor health outcomes
Mhm.
to economic instability and a lack of economic mobility. So what we're trying to say is we're going to center problem solving based on where those disparities exist, based on what the data says the indicators are, and try to adapt problem solving to fit those needs. And so we do lean in heavily on race, but don't get it twisted. Diversity and equity are not just about race. They can have something to do with race, but it's not just about race and it's not just about black and white.
And Jonathan, you bring up a good point. When you're talking about diversity, it's important to make sure you identify what level of diversity you're actually focusing on, because that's where people lose their way. So if you serve on a board that, and one of the things that they put on their strategic goals is that they want to be more diverse. What exactly does that mean? Because in my mind, I'm thinking they want to be racially diverse, but then 6 months down the line, they'll say, but we have women of all ages, and they use that as a level of diversity. So it's important to identify what channel of diversity you actually want to focus on. And that's important because that word can be interchangeable so easily, and it's very easy to use it as a term, but then not follow through with actually what level of diversity you actually need. So you brought up a good point with that, Jonathan.
And thank you for that. That leads actually to a good segue to my next question in terms of what we value is what we measure and what gets funded. So when you all think about your own workplaces, what are some examples? So we've talked about problem solving, we've talked about critical thinking, we've talked about identifying, we talked about what progress looks like. What would be an example that our community and our stakeholders could relate to and say, here's an example of a need that we found, here's how we intentionally addressed it through this work of our diversity, equity, and inclusion lens. So what would be an example that you've seen, that you've developed, that you've created as a result of really understanding the need?
Stacey, you have a great one. I'd love for you to lead that.
Oh, I don't even know what you, which one you got going on in your mind, but I'll talk about.
It don't matter. Pick one. You got a bunch.
I'll talk about a program that we run at PEF, the Public Education Foundation, called Camp College. It started back in 1999 on the campus of the University of the South to address a gap, a knowledge gap and an information gap of students in public schools. 20 years ago, Black and brown students and low-income students from public schools were not going to college at the same rates. And so this program was created for students who were on free or reduced lunch, who may be first in their families to go to college. And we take those students 3 days to the University of the South and drive them up there and pair them with college admissions professionals from all across the country in small groups to infuse a bunch of knowledge about how to apply for college, how to fund college, what financial aid means, like all this information that students would typically get from their college counselor at another school, at a private school. And if you think about 20 years ago, and even now, in public schools, there would be one counselor to 500, 600, 700 students. So one counselor can't disseminate information. And so Camp College was a program that was created to work with students in small groups, to embed and inform students of what it takes to get to college. And so we track, you said what is valued, what gets measured. So we know from Camp College, we track the students from Camp College who have gone to college, who persist through college from year 1 to year 2 to graduation. And we track the number of Camp College participants who graduate from college. So we know that 100% of students who go to Camp College apply to college. We know that approximately 96 or 97% of low-income students who are Black, brown, and from low-income families return to college after their first year. And we know that 77% of those students graduate from college within 6 years, compared to a 26% college graduation rate, national college graduation rate. So we know that Kemp College is working, which is why it's been able to be sustained year after year after year. But again, it's being honest about where those gaps are in public schools, and it is about bringing the right people to the table and collaborating with the partners who are willing to help you close that gap. So again, like the work that I have done over the last 20 years is very programmatic, right? It's very specific. That is how we address this system of inequity, by identifying and creating the mechanism by which students now get the information, and now they go to college at actually higher rates than students in public school. And Camp College, I mean, it still exists and it still goes on, and that is how we create programs and implement programs at PEF.
Wow, that's a phenomenal example.
Thank you.
Dion or Jonathan, other strategies or examples of how you're implementing this type of work in your own workforce?
Yeah, so one of the things that I hate to hear, but unfortunately in financial services, it's true, is the phrase of "we can't find good talent," right? I really hate to hear that. But one of the things that I find in financial services is when you think of banking and when you think of this industry, you think of white males in suits leading an organization. And that's typically what it is. So one thing that we do as a financial institution, and what most financial institutions do, is go out and do financial literacy, right? That's important. For me, in this line of work, it's important that I'm talking to students in elementary, middle, high school, and at the university level to say that this line of work is a viable option for you. You can find a job in financial services. We have a need for attorneys, human resources, IT, for marketing, and everything that you can do at any other business you can do here in financial services. But they need to know that that option is available. But one of the deterrents for us is, one, we are going to do a background check, and two, we are going to do a credit check. So making sure that students know early on that you have to be good stewards of your credit, and you have to make good decisions so that when we run that background check, things don't pop up. And when we do a credit report, that you have what it takes. Now, do I think there are ways that we can get around that? Absolutely. And do I think that we could look at it and say, well, why do they have to have an 800 credit score as opposed to a 550? Well, one of the concerns, just as a member, is I want to make sure that the person that's responsible for my money is going to do right by my money. And if they can't do it with their own, how can they advise me on what to do with mine? So educating students early to let them know that that's important before they go out and make bad choices, before they go out and open up credit cards and think, I don't have to pay that off. You know, I've done that. So getting that education out so that when they do apply for a job, we can't say, well, you're not qualified, right? I want to stop that in financial services of people saying, well, we can't find good talent. Well, I'm trying to tell the talent now how they can get a job at the credit union before anybody can stop them at the door with that barrier. So that's one of the things that I focus on in this role in my recruitment.
That's really important. And I remember going off to college and signing up for anybody else. You're like, oh, you get a t-shirt. I didn't understand financial literacy and what that meant and what I was signing my name and social security number to get a t-shirt or a water bottle, or it was like tickets to a football game, which were probably already free for students. We just didn't know. And so I'm really excited to hear that we're really taking financial literacy seriously, and we're providing opportunities and programs and initiatives, like you said, for students early on to understand what that actually means.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
John,
I got the Citibank water bottle back in the day too,
Discover
right?
card,
It's like, didn't even know that the banks buy each other out and they change names and all this stuff. That's a whole nother conversation that
Mhm.
we'll get to at another point in time. Well, we could also talk about inequities associated in credit scores and how
Mhm.
if you rent and you've been a long time renter, that's not likely to come in your credit score, right? And
Right.
so these are some of the ways in which there are barriers to um, economic mobility, particularly that largely affect people of color. But transition to think about um, some of the things that you all noted in terms of operationalizing and how do we identify some needs and then how do we put that into policy. A good friend of mine who is now the dean of the Wharton Business School, Erica James, said when she was dean of Emory University's business school, she said, hey, I looked around and I saw there were no women or very few women in our faculty. And I started asking questions. And what she recognized when she started asking questions is how do you think you will identify and find talent if you keep going to the same well, right? If you keep looking at the same things, doing the same things over and over again, finding the same results, you're likely to find the same results. So to Dion's example, her sense is, nah, I want you to go out and find um, disciplines that women are in who could also be professors in a business school. So instead of, let's say, going into economics, why aren't we looking at marketing? Why aren't we looking at some other disciplines that would yield more talent? So I think that that's the first thing. Once you identify the problem, identify the need, then you start critically thinking about how do we tweak what we're doing or examine or assess in ways in which we then say, hey, the problem is we're not looking at the right places to find qualified talent, right? That's number one. How we have done that in the city of San Antonio is in a myriad of different ways within our office. First and foremost, I'm in a city that is about 67% Latinx. And so within the diaspora of Latin or Hispanic individuals, you would think, for example, that if we had boards and commissions that advise the city, that they also would be largely populated by Latinx people. Was not the case when we did
Mhm.
an assessment. When we were asked to look at diversity within our boards and commissions, we found that Latinx people were underrepresented within people who would be sitting on these representative boards. Okay, so the first thing you have to do is do some type of assessment to find data, right? You get your data points, you get your data sets, you can identify problem solving. Some ways in which we did some really great things associated even with our response and recovery efforts for the COVID pandemic um, were simply to say, hey, we are getting all of these indications that COVID is hitting persons of color much harder in terms of the health consequences and then the economic impact of those the pandemic. And so what we did within our housing context and within our economic development context, we found ways to create some programs that would then put forth some resources, both federal resources that we were getting from CARES Act funding and local resources to say, hey, a lot of people are losing their jobs because of this pandemic. A lot of those jobs aren't coming back. Let's be forward thinking and not just say, hey, we're going to invest a whole bunch of money in trying to prop up businesses to do business as usual when the whole landscape of business has changed and many of these businesses aren't coming back. What can we then do to support those largely Black and brown people of color who are out of work and are going to have trouble transitioning back into work, regardless of what the economy looks like? And so we designed a program that steered more resources into workforce development, and we tiered mechanisms based on race and income for individuals to be able to receive points that are going to give their applications more value as they apply, trying to disperse the resources based on where the needs are. We also looked at geography. If you look at redlining data
Mhm.
from most cities, you look at concentrations of race and poverty, most of those cities are going to align based on the way they were redlined in 30s and 40s. Okay. Same is true in San Antonio. You have high concentrations of racial segregation, same areas of high concentrations of poverty. So, how then could we prioritize from an economic development standpoint, even if there were PPE going to small businesses? How can we prioritize ensuring that they are in places who are most likely to be adversely affected, with less likely the resources, Dion, to be able to, or the ability to even apply to financial institutions for funding? So we come in, we create a rubric around that, and then we start dispersing PPE in most needed, hardest hits types of areas. Those are some examples of how we are, working to kind of operationalize this stuff and turn it into not just, hey, conceptual ideology, but there are real world results that
Mhm.
come from improved outcomes for people.
So you're talking about a community needs assessment, you're talking about evaluation and measurement, and it sounds like you all are also talking about innovation, right? So how do you see innovation really being a key trait for you as leaders in your own organizations, or what you see in leadership in terms of really not just having diversity, equity, and inclusion being a feeling, but it being initiatives where we see, particularly in higher education, and then some of our students on the call are thinking about health and healthcare and medicine as a field. So what does innovation, do you think, looks like from a leadership standpoint?
That is, I'll start if you all don't mind. Critical question, right? Innovation is trying to be we try to put innovation at the forefront of what we're doing, right? And so the ways in which we're trying to collect data and reach populations, Dr. Howard Baptiste, that ordinarily don't participate in city services, government in that way. How do we then make sure that we can identify and assess those needs, right? And a lot of the and in most communities, there are huge digital divides.
Hmm.
Those divides often are segmented based on age. They are based also on race, and they are based on income, usually, right? And so, how then do we use kind of um, innovative ways that sometimes might be old school ways of actually going out and doing traditional canvassing and door knocking
Hmm.
to ensure that we are even telling people where they can go for resources? I know you all, as we use a lot of support and help from universities and students then who are doing research for us. Their research and information helps us build out public facing dashboards that do everything from help us get some type of accounting of where people are being evicted in the COVID crisis, right? Because as their wages have decreased, as unemployment insurance has not been renewed in ways in which it's helping people, track everything from evictions to how many people are at food banks to contact tracing. All of these things are really relevant right now and really ripe. And for us as city government that also has the lion's share of community health with it, we are trying to get as much information as humanly possible from reliable sources,
Hmm.
merge them into the right platforms to where then ultimately they are more accessible for people. And for us, that means oftentimes having to translate materials. In English and Spanish in my community are pretty much everything is translated. But now we've identified everything from what are the 10 most used languages in our city to be able to try to ensure that we've got enough information that goes out to them. So we work heavily with our Office of Innovation. They do a lot of work. They actually helped us do that boards and commissions study and assessment. And then they help us apply real world technological solutions to some of what we're doing. The last thing I'll say is this: we created an equity matrix that's on our website. That matrix tracks everything from census tracts to racial, economic data for our whole city within our all of our 10 council districts. And what people can do is they can go into that matrix and they can plug in information and they can identify where there may be some opportunities there in terms of where some of the wealth and income gaps are, where some of the most rental properties are, if you will, to home ownership opportunities. So we're trying to use technology in ways to be more forward thinking. And sometimes, don't be surprised, innovation actually comes from applying old school strategies to problem solving.
Thank you. Stacy or Dion, kind of what does innovation look like in leadership?
So we use data to drive and inform the work that we do. And so, we figure out what it is we want to do and who we want to do it for. We see who in the world is doing it and doing it right and doing it well. And we bring the right stakeholders to the table. Getting constituents' voice really matters to help build and create the thing, and you be bold and create it. And you go to work. It's that simple to me. I think a lot of people take a lot of time to build something to make sure that it is perfect, but there is someone somewhere in this world, someone in this world who's doing the work and who's doing it well. And you just get the right partners at the table. Be unafraid to try something new, to close a gap. And to support the people that you are trying to serve and learn from, and bring those folks to the table. A lot of times others try to create something for people without asking the people what it is that they want and what it is that they need. And a lot of times those voices at the table can help you figure out what it is they need very quickly. And so figuring out who in the world is doing that work and doing it well and doing it right, being bold and building it.
Right. Those stakeholders, they have to be at the table. They have to be part of the decision-making process. Dion, you're going to add?
Yeah, just very short to what Stacy said. Innovation and inclusion go hand in hand. So in order to truly be innovative, you have to have people with different levels of experience at the table to talk about what they've already tried or what they've seen or where they've been. And that's the biggest piece about this whole DEI work, is having those voices at the table and listening to what they bring. So innovation and inclusion, to me, go hand in hand.
I love that. So we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and what you all, it sounds like a labor of love and work and commitment. So this work is not easy. I have other friends who are in this line of work. It is not easy work. So how do you deal with conflict? So even though you all are passionate and you're excited and you are mission driven, you believe in the work that you're doing and have been doing it for decades now, how do you address conflict? What does conflict look like either in an advisory board or through your service or through the organization? So what does conflict look like, and how is that conflict resolved? Because not everyone is going to have the same level of interest and commitment that our panelists do, that those of us who are on this call this evening do. So how are you addressing conflict, and what does resolution look like?
So I don't mind taking the first stab at that. One thing that's important is respect. So as professionals, we can have a dialogue and keep it respectful and understand that at times someone's going to say something that you don't agree with, and you can respectfully disagree and bring your point to fruition and talk it through. But that respect piece is really important in conflict. One thing that I look at this work as, we're going to be the agitators. If you're not aggravating and agitating someone in DEI, you're not doing something right, right? That's what we're here for. But not an agitator in the way that we have to be the pit bull ready to attack all the time. Sometimes you're just that gnat flying around that people are trying to shoo off, right? But in that work, you have to continue to ask the tough question. And for me, the question is why? I just want you to answer for me why. If you can answer that and it's something that I can live with, then okay, great, let's move forward. But if the why is, well, I feel, well, it's not about feeling. It has to be based on the data. It has to be based on some type of relevant information that can be backed up and you can support it in some way. And so that agitation is really important in conflict, but knowing that sometimes we're going to disagree and we have to professionally find a way to have the dialogue and be open and honest about what needs to change or what needs to happen. And that's how I think you can resolve conflict.
I like how you describe that, Dion. It reminds me of my one of my mentors in graduate school when I just first started teaching, and my teaching evaluations as a professor would say she talks about race too much. And I went back to her, and it was a Black female scholar, and she said, that means you're almost talking about it enough. And it completely changed my perspective about how I talk about race and ethnicity and diversity and inclusion in my own courses, so that when students say, oh, she talks about it too much, that means, okay, I'm almost there in terms of really addressing it. And you're right, it's uncomfortable, it's not easy, but it's important work that has to be done. Stacy or Jonathan, in terms of what conflict looks like when you're doing this type of work.
Sure. I'm, kind of to build off of what Dion said, and just being clear about a few things. The why, making sure that everyone's at the table for the same reasons, having a common agenda, understand what you want to measure, understanding what you want to measure and what needs to be measured, and building the kind of relationships to get the right people at the table and defining the roles of those people and evaluating. And that mitigates conflict. And then if there is conflict, when you have the right people at the table, you take the time to build the relationships with the right people, then you can address conflict very easy by going back to the why, by going back to the metrics, by evaluating. And if people are just uncomfortable being at the table, then you move forward without them. Right? Like you just move forward without. You're not going to get everyone on the train. Everyone isn't supposed to be on the train, and that's okay. The train's going to take off without them when people at the table are clear about why they're there and what they want, what they want the impact to be. And that takes time in the beginning. I think people rush into building things too quickly without the right people, or trying to build it on their own. And I think that's where a lot of the conflict and the rub kind of comes from, when it's not built with fidelity and with time and with patience.
Because what you're really describing is a strategy of how you bring people together. And it's not a sign-up sheet of, do you want to do this work, or do you want, it's being very intentional and strategic about who's at the table.
Yeah, and when you talk about DEI work, it's just uncomfortable. It really is uncomfortable. It's having the right definitions, right? Like people don't understand what it is and what it means for them. So the why is really important, just really defining the why collectively, right? And making sure that people have a common definitions of what that is and what their return on investment is in whatever work or whatever field.
Well, and building on Stacey's point, there are a lot of people who enter into discussions within this work. So I do a lot of facilitations. I do trainings on everything from racial equity to interrupting microaggressions, implicit bias, those types of things. And most people enter into spaces saying, number one, I'm not a racist. Number two, many people say I don't see color. All right. Terribly problematic on a lot of different levels that we won't get into. That's for another discussion. Okay. But this idea that being honest, having necessary but difficult conversations. We have mythologized in our culture this idea around trying to create safe spaces. I've been introduced, I was first introduced into this work in the days when we used to talk about it as affirmative action. We moved more from affirmative action to multiculturalism, right? We then went from multiculturalism to polyculturalism, right? We went from that to diversity. Now we're talking about diversity and inclusion in some spaces. And now we're talking about equity. This stuff evolves, language evolves, things change. But this notion that when we talk about what formerly was safe spaces, was this idea that everybody's got to feel comfortable and everybody has to um, almost essentially not create conflict, right? We do need safe spaces. We have to have safe spaces for people to feel comfortable being themselves and they get to show up as their authentic self. Right. What we promote now in my teachings is brave spaces. We want people to have show up as their authentic selves, but be able to have conversations as their authentic selves, right? And that requires that people have to be comfortable sometimes with discomfort. And people have to lean into that as a mechanism to improve, to grow, to learn, to be better. My job these days is not always to make you feel safe and comfortable because everything that happens in this life and in this world is not safe and comfortable. But what I do believe that you should have, as Dion eloquently stated, there has to be some mutuality of respect, right? But what some people don't understand is respecting me is allowing my race, my being, my gender identity, to my whether I choose to identify on a binary scale or not. Whatever my choices are, that also needs to be allowed to be in the room, right? And until we can have communities that are assembled that know the value of allowing that authenticity to enter into the space to create opportunities for growth and positive, constructive conflict resolution, things will be challenging. And they will be challenging in part because we've got to get out of our own way and be honest with ourselves, right? Let's be real and honest and have authentic conversations about everything from um, uh, deficiencies to disparities to white fragility to any number of things that bar progress, you know? So I like to think of relying, we keep talking a lot about data and facts. In our interrupting microaggression sessions, we often talk about how you can rely on policies to interrupt microaggressions, right? So how do you then work through conflict resolution in real and honest ways? I'm much more interested in now than people just, you know, associating conflict resolution with this idea that people are just going to be comfortable. And so we have to embrace paradox in that way. And I think we have to be comfortable knowing that every interaction is not going to end in a nice little neat bow and it be tied up nice and neatly for people. And that's okay. That's
Mhm.
okay. We need people to be able to lean in and to rest in that discomfort because we do believe it produces something much more constructive.
And so we're thinking about what looks constructive. And as we think about our college students, graduate and undergraduate students here at UTC, how do you begin to foster that environment, right? How do you begin to nurture a space where all students, regardless of their, their race, ethnicity, geographically where they're from, where their parents live, first generation, all those different things that make up all the complexities of each of our unique identities. As characteristics, as programs, as initiatives, what can we do as a campus to start to foster that type of climate where students come to our campus, or really any college campus, and they feel welcome, they feel invited, they feel like, as you all had mentioned, I think Jonathan mentioned, Miss Myers, how do you feel like someone is inviting you to the party, is asking you to dance? So what does it look like to foster that type of climate on a college campus?
Um, so this is pretty simple, um, but it is when I think about a college campus, does the student body reflect the community
Mhm.
that it serves? Do faculty and staff members reflect uh, the diversity of thought of the community it serves and the students that it serves? So you have to be really intentional to answer those questions, be prepared for the answer, and also be prepared for the work
Mm.
um, to ensure that the campus does. So I know that UTC is fairly diverse, but I also know that a lot of college campuses struggle with recruiting and
Mhm.
retaining its faculty and staff. So drilling down and asking, like, why is it so hard? And why is retaining faculty and staff, or why is retaining students of color or students from certain geographic areas hard to do? And one way to do that is to ask the faculty and staff, or ask the students, and then listen
Mhm.
and be prepared for that answer, and be prepared to make the changes to ensure that students feel safe, welcome, valued, and able to do their best work, so that faculty members feel safe, welcomed, and valued, so that they are able to do their best work. And not, and in many cases on college campuses, and you see this nationally as reports and the media, shows that that isn't the case at a lot of institutions. They'll create an office, or they'll have one person designated in the multicultural office, or one or two people on its faculty and staff who are overburdened because not a lot of students see Black women, or not a lot of students see African American, or Hispanic faculty and students, and that is hard.
Mhm.
So it's being intentional and doing the work
Mhm.
and making it happen. It sounds hard, but it really isn't. You go recruit and you find out what people need to feel valued and to feel welcomed in the space, and you make it happen.
Make it
And
happen.
if you don't have the resources, if you don't have the tools in place, get the resources and the tools in place to make it happen.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with Stacy more. Oftentimes, there are two things that people make the mistake of. If you have challenges in a society, people oftentimes look for the people who are victimized to solve the problems for the challenges. Okay. I think we often do that in universities. We do that a lot. We start leaning on, hey, the faculty member that's a person of color, to try to go and engage students of color, right? We say equity is everybody's job. It is. Everybody has to be responsible for it, and everybody has to be a part of the problem solving for it. And I agree with Stacy 100%. Intentionality is important. I also think we've continued to talk at this conversation about inclusion, but we haven't really talked about what that looks like. I mean, giving people a voice to where they feel a part of the destiny
Mhm.
of the thing matters. So whether it's students, whether it is frontline workers, whether it is folks who are servicing you all's facilities and cleaning them up on a daily basis, whether it is people in the professoriate, you name it, up and down the spectrum, inclusion happens. I'm consulting on a couple projects with a couple universities, and one of the things that kind of is triggering to me, and no offense, Dr. Howard Baptiste, because I know you share my sentiments, but oftentimes universities think of themselves as being very much driven and led by faculty. And many times, faculty won't adapt to the changes that are happening in society to even account for the myriad of diverse populations now they are teaching to. If you're a tenured faculty member and you've been so for 25 years and you're teaching the same curriculum, doing the
The
same
same
stuff that
way,
you were
yeah.
doing 25 years ago, you already lose it. All right. Young people today, as they matriculate throughout your universities, are so much more in tune, so much more complex. They are talking about things and feel centered and connected to things in ways that are vastly different even than our generations. And I think we feel somewhat connected to younger people, right? If you can't adapt, these are ways when you ask the question, how do we create welcoming environments? The first thing that young people, as they come to you all's university and they interact with you, they have to understand that you two are in the business of adaptability within the academy. There is no other environment as perfect as academic institutions to be able to talk about everything from what we're talking about with, whether it's through examinations of things like critical race theory, or it's through talking about the day-to-day and we in ways in which we are looking at the arc of student participation as what type of adults they're going to be. What is their influence and impact going to be in a global community? And we live in a global world now. And so I think if I were just saying to people, well, Shawani, what would it take to create a more inclusive community? You got to ask people, first of all, ask people questions with genuine curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
Ask them what drives them, what motivated them to come here in the first place. What did they want to get out of this experience? What do they need? What do they like? Where do they want to be? Right? Asking people questions genuinely to find out, well, who is our community? It's not just a bunch of data sets. Yes, we love data. Data informs us in some ways, but it's also more about who are we? What are our morals? What are our values? What do we really stand for? What type of student and community do we want to represent and then introduce and project out to the rest of the world? And I think you can do that by, as Stacey said, being intentional. You ask questions of everybody with genuine curiosity. You involve them in decision-making processes, and you encourage people to modernize and adapt. And that requires some of these same trainings that we're talking about. Some of the people who are the biggest, most ardent resistors to everything from diversity types of training to anything that would be some consciousness about what's happening critically in the moment tend to be faculty members. And so it's like, we need you to embrace the idea of the evolving society that we hope you are trying to create and engineer people and be active in that growth process too. So you've got to model growth and not fixed mentalities as well. So this is my 2 cents on
He's
that.
giving us our charge, that's for sure. Dion, you wanted to add?
Jonathan really summed it up. I mean, absolutely, he said it all. But I think that intentionality, that adaptability. He brought up a point earlier that I kind of wanted to expound upon on this question is for students being able to bring their authentic self to the university. That's important, but then educating the staff and faculty and meeting them there and taking them even further. But you can't have a conversation with the student if you guys are talking two different languages and neither of you are willing to adapt. But we have to, one, when you talk about belonging, I want students and I want youth and especially students of color to understand that you belong. If you got there, you belong. And you have a responsibility to learn and grow and move forward in there. But don't be intimidated by the fact that you are the only one there. You're there and you need to make a difference, and you can make that difference. And I know we feel like that weight falls on our shoulders so much, but you belong there and take advantage of that opportunity. But as Jonathan said, It's up to that faculty to be able to meet them there in that moment and then take it further. And that's how they all grow. So Jonathan, everything he said, I agree with, but I just kind of wanted to bring that point of, I want students to know that you belong in whatever space you have been invited to. Take up that time, use it as a growth opportunity. Sometimes you don't even have to say anything. Absorb what's being said, take it in and learn, but don't ever be intimidated by by the fact that you may be the only person of color, the only woman, the only whatever, but you belong in that space. You're not there by accident. So I really wanted to just kind of add that point to it.
And I think students too, they should draw on their power. Look, the university exists because they're there, right? So it's the driver of the lifeline of the university is the student. And so if students can encourage and create and demand the type of culture they want to have, right, which includes openness and inclusiveness and all those types of things, they have the power to be able to do that. They have the power to really transform the life of the university in really, really positive ways.
That was actually my next question. And I think, Dion, to your point, that visibility and presence and hearing that they belong, I think we've all probably in our professional careers or even as a college student, we're the only, student of color in the classroom of whether it was 50 or 150, or the only person of color as a faculty member or a VP or vice chancellor or whatever our titles are. So as we think about that value of and feeling of what it feels like to feel valued, to feel important, to feel acknowledged on a college campus for our students, my question for our panel is, what can our students do to engage faculty, staff, administration, other students to help foster that sense of belonging? So Dion, you definitely touched on that. And Jonathan, you started to give us some strategies about really students owning the power and presence that they have on our college campuses to really be the change that they want to see in these spaces. So what can our students do to kind of galvanize their own efforts, regardless of what their background is, to see that level of change on our college campuses?
I mean, I would say join organizations, support other organizations, learn from someone who thinks differently. Don't be afraid to be challenged and to change. And, I was thinking as you were talking, Dion, about this sense of belonging when you are the only one at the table. Like, how do I belong when I am the only one at the table? How do I feel like I belong when I'm the only one at the table? Like, how do I feel empowered when I am the only one at the table? And something that we tell students who are part of a program is you fake it until you make it, right? Like, you constantly tell yourself that you belong there. Like, you force yourself to believe that. And when you believe it, you start to act like you are. Because people around you, like the system may not have it together, but to one of your points, Dion, if you are at the university, you belong there. And there are going to be people and adults around who may not understand like what it takes to make you feel like you belong. So you gotta do it, and you've got to find that power and use that power within yourself to really invoke and incite that deeper sense of belonging, and find one or two people there who get you.
Yes.
And then you find two other people there who get y'all. And then you form a group. And you form and you create and you build that thing. And one thing that I tell students, from Chattanooga who are going to college in the Northeast or who are going to college out West, you find someone else from the South. You find a professor who shares shares a hobby. You find someone there is feeling the same way that you feel, and you got to go out and find them. You're not going to find them sitting in your room feeling sorry for yourself, right? They are there. Someone is there who likes anime. Someone is at your institution who likes to crochet. Like there's someone there who is into jujitsu. Like there is someone there who likes gospel music. Like you are going to find, but you're not going to find that person feeling sorry for yourself up in your room. So there is, the onus also is on a student to go out and feel empowered and to seek something, someone, something, someone in the community to build their own community. So.
Certainly. I always tell people, because they ask me when it comes to this work, well, how do I meet people that are not like me? How do I reach across the aisle and do this? And I tell them it's as simple as saying hello. Stop overthinking it. Say hello. If you see someone in the food court eating something that you like, and you can, oh my goodness, is that good? I've wanted to try it, but I wasn't sure. Do you like it? Start a conversation over something just so small. And hello and a smile go a long way in this work.
It certainly
But
does.
when you talk about belonging and finding someone like you have to find an ally, find an advocate, find someone who wants change but may not look like you. I gave this an example. I spoke at a class at UTC a few weeks ago, and the example that I gave is I was sitting at a board meeting one day, and the woman beside me was a white woman. I had made a point at like the board meeting before, and everyone looked at me as though I was the angry Black woman. And then in this particular meeting, she made the exact same point that I made, and everyone was on board and was like, that's the greatest thing ever. And I leaned into her and I said, I want to be like you when I grow up. And she said, what does that mean? I said the same thing yesterday, but I was an angry Black woman. And now you said it today and everyone's on board. So I want to know your strategy and how you can say it, but I can't. And she said, did I miss it last week? And I said, apparently, because you were here, or last month. And I said, yeah, you were here. And she said, I'll make it a point from now on not to miss it. And so with that, if I made a point or someone else made a point, she would be the first to step up and say, hey, let's not discount what she just said, because that is a very relevant to the conversation. And so finding someone who has the voice and has the attention that you're trying to get and making them an ally will certainly help in you moving forward in your efforts. And then people will start to go, oh, wait, now maybe I should listen to what Dion has to say. Maybe I should listen to what Jonathan is bringing to the discussion, because sometimes that implicit, unconscious, whatever bias that they have causes them to tune it out, but you might need someone to be that voice for you in that moment to open their ears and open that door. So don't be afraid to befriend someone that doesn't look like you or someone that you think you don't have something in common with.
And Deanna, I want to applaud your courage to even, I can think of situations that I've been in and my students share with me of someone else saying their idea or sharing their idea, and then it just stays within them. So it never comes out. So I applaud your braveness just to say in a very public space, I actually said the same thing at the last board meeting, but no one seems to have heard or I'll say heard, they didn't hear you. And so instead of people pointing the finger at you to say, well, you should have articulated it differently versus let's put the onus and responsibility, as Stacey had mentioned earlier, about we have to be transparent about where we are and hold ourselves accountable. So I think that's a great example. Jonathan, you were going to add?
Yeah, it's interesting. I know this reference might be dated for some of the students. It's almost 30 years old now. It's actually a little over 30 years old. But when we talk about do the right thing, there's a moment in Do the Right Thing, the movie, famous
Spike
movie
Lee.
of Spike Lee, for all of the students and the other folks who would consume this product later, right? And in the moment, one of the characters goes into the pizzeria that's owned by an Italian person in a Black neighborhood and basically asks, why aren't there any Black people on the wall, right? All of your customers are Black. You have this business in a Black neighborhood. Why don't you have any Black people on the wall? Acknowledging sort of the place of, where you are in ways that connect with the people that you serve, right? If I'm still, and ultimately the climax of the moment is the same thing that we're talking about, whether it's George Floyd, um, the moment is the same. Okay. So um to know that even 30 years later, even though it may be dated for some of you all students, but it's the same thing,
Mhm.
right? It's the same thing. It's the same moment. And so what came to mind, Dr. Howard Baptiste, when I was listening to you, is really students have to recognize their power too as educators. In some instances, they are going to be educating faculty. In order to do that, you have to engage. Um, my alma mater, Emory University, our motto is the wise heart seeks knowledge. And if we think about the academy as a whole as being this vessel for the dissemination and exchange of knowledge, then students are just as integral in the participation of that than anybody else.
Mhm.
And so I would say to students, get to know your faculty, get to know people. Stacey talked about it in terms of trying to, hey, there are some people who you might have some commonalities and some similarities with, and oftentimes they don't look like you.
Right.
It doesn't excuse the fact that we need to create mechanisms so that you see people that look like you doing whatever it is, from teaching to sports to whatever it is, right? You have to have that, but also know that sometimes you interacting with like-minded individuals will simply be getting to know enough about people that you may connect with. Sometimes that may happen in discipline, like in terms of what you're studying. Sometimes it may happen through some extracurricular or clubs and associations. One of the things I want to encourage UTC students in particular to do is get involved.
Mhm.
One of the things that I think is really lacking at UTC, and I've got enough knowledge to be able to say that, is this real sense of students being able to sort of participate in robust ways to where they really do feel like they have a stake in transforming the university. I don't see that. I'd love to see that. And I think a part of that is recognizing voice and recognizing power
Mhm.
and engaging. Like I know you, Dr. Howard Baptiste, as an incredible mentor to students, but I know that there are so many more students who need to be having a conversation with you, who you can't grab them fast
Mhm.
enough, right? To sit down and have a conversation with you, right? People, students in particular, should take advantage of those opportunities to get to know their administrators, get to know their faculty, hold people accountable, and have some things that are worthy of, just kind of supporting growth in ways that are going to not only help you as an individual, personally and professionally, but also the university as a whole.
So to your point, and everyone has kind of alluded to this, and I think about, who's at the table, who's missing. So how do we encourage an 18 or 19-year-old who now has access to their professors, to staff, to administration? And to your point, Jonathan, I think everyone has echoed this, is we're strongly encouraging our students to talk to their faculty and staff, but what's the how? Because I literally had 3 conversations last week of just follow-up emails of a student who said, so and so was my mentor and they said I should talk to you. So that's kind of at least how they got looped in. But students can go online, they can Google certain faculty in their department. They may not necessarily have a class with them, but they definitely see either their research or there's some level of visibility that they can actually connect with. So what's a specific strategy that we could tell our students when we say get involved, be engaged? What does that look like? How do you approach a faculty or staff member on your college campus that resembles something that you're interested in, but you feel afraid, you feel like, I don't know if they're going to receive me, whatever fears or notions that students might have? What's the how? How do students take that first step and reach out to their faculty and staff?
I think one thing I'll say is this: first and foremost, younger generations have this idea that other people will come to them.
Mm.
So oftentimes when I try to engage in mentoring relationships with students, the onus seems to be put on me more as mentor. And what our generations or older generations expect from younger generations are that the younger generations go to them and
Mhm.
ask for. So one of the first lessons, and I think we used to do this thing called the reality is at Emory University, where we bring the undergraduate students in, we bring specifically Black alums at the time in, and we force students to sort of learn how to network and interact with and talk to. And we did all kind of things, from breaking them out based on career disciplines, to we did speed networking. We did so some of this behavior, Dr. Howard Baptiste, I think has to be taught.
Yeah.
Again, going back to intentionality, right? We've got to have some platform within the institution, whether it's through freshman seminars or whether it's
Mhm.
through career services, that specifically says these are some of the skills that are necessary for you to be able to interact with people like Dion, because you're going to have some soft skills and some ability to be able to communicate with people, before you're going to be able to get some doors open. I think the second thing that is worth noting is that building a network is important. All of us on this call are friends. We are outstanding professionals, right? But we also are in community with one another through a network. And what that means is everything from when a job posting comes available, we hit each other up, to when something is happening in life that may need some more things than just friendship can handle. Who am I going to call? Who do I trust to give me advice about professional, about personal? Tell me that my stuff don't smell too good. You know what I mean? Like, you gotta have some of that, right? And you gotta go, and you got some of it is just straight up, it's got to be learned behavior. It has to be trained. And then I'll just wrap up my remarks and let the other panelists speak by just saying this. The other part of it is students have to understand that in order to build and create relationships in that setting, they've got to make the first move. It's like dating, right?
Mhm.
If you go out and you say, hey, now generations who aren't bound by traditional societal classifications and norms, right? They feel more empowered to go out and then make the first move. I think this is the same thing. You've got to go and say, hey, I'm interested,
Mhm.
right? Occasionally, faculty or administrators or staff will pull a talented person to the side that they have recognized and say, hey, I know you are
Yeah.
interested in that. I need to introduce you to,
Mhm.
right? But that is more rare, okay, than them making the first move to denote interest. Last thing I'll say is I'll give you an example. There's a student that I work with at Emory University. This kid, first time I met him, he is the type of person that if you give your number to, you give your cell phone, and I've done this at UTC. I've given out my cell phone number, I've given my emails, I've given out my information to students who I never hear from, right?
Mhm.
Okay. And so this young man says, you know what, this is who I am, this is what I'm about. That guy will call me, he will email me, he will do everything. And you know what happens? I got that guy all the way on a line to the president of the university to be able to be like, yo, if Daniel calls or if Daniel sends an email, I don't know what you're doing, make sure you staff. But that's the power
Mhm.
of networks, right? Because this guy was so persistent. He engaged me so well. I hooked him up with like 4 or 5 people. And he's gonna get a scholarship to go to graduate
Mhm.
school and it all be paid for. Okay. So that's what I'm talking about. And I think students have to recognize sometimes that you got to make the first move. In
Yeah.
order for anybody to know anything about who you are or what you're interested in, you got to put yourself out there.
I love that. And as a faculty member, those are things that get me very, very excited to be able to plug students in. And I can literally say I've on a regular basis, my background is not in law. So when I meet a student or who becomes a mentee, who's like, I'm really interested in law school. Hey, Jonathan, I have a connect. Can I send someone your way? Stacy, we had a student who really wanted to do policy work in education, connected her with Stacy. That turned into a summer undergraduate research fellowship for which she got paid through the university. That turned into letters of recommendation. So all those networks are certainly there. So you're absolutely right, Jonathan. If students make the first move, I promise you, your faculty and staff will make 10 steps, but we have to know who you are and what your interests are. So Stacy and Deanne, other suggestions for students to stay engaged?
Yeah, I wanted to add to that point is when we have a name, right? We have to protect our reputation. And so in order for us to put our name on the line and support you, you have to show us that you want it. You have to be one that's going to follow up and follow through. If I tell you to call me Tuesday and I never hear from you, and then 2 months later you ask me to write a letter of recommendation, it's not coming.
Right.
Because you couldn't even do that little piece in calling me. But if I know, like the student Jonathan talked about, if I know you're going to follow up, you'll call, you'll email, you'll show up at my door, I'll go to bat for you 100 times, every single time. And my friends will too, just because I've said, hey, Jonathan, I would like for you to help this student. Jonathan will say, oh, absolutely. It came from you. So students need to understand that we will be willing to put our name and our reputation on the line for them. So they have to do their part in that. But making that connection. And one thing that students have today that we didn't have when we were students is technology. It's utilize it. You want to know something? You think you might want to know something about an organization? Go online, do some research, find out who's involved with it. If Dr. Baptiste is part of it and you know her, then you can reach out to her and say, I'm interested in XYZ organization. I noticed you're on the board or you have some affiliation with it. What can you tell me about it? Or who can you connect me with?
Absolutely.
To do their part. They have to.
And they have to follow through, Deanne, to your point. So it's not just that initial connection. I see Jonathan put in the chat. I had a mentee of mine, Queen, who was finished here at UTC about 2 years ago and interested in law school, which turned into her getting a master's degree, I think from George Washington, if I'm not mistaken, in nonprofit management. So again, all those opportunities turn into something because you're consistent, you initiated that conversation, and you have that follow through. We're happy to support you, but we have to know who you are. Stacey, you wanted to add?
I honestly don't have anything more to add. I really don't have any. I mean, they took everything that I was going to say.
Well, let's answer Trish's question. So Trish says in the chat, looping back to a previous topic, my biology class had a discussion about feeling welcome as a person of color in STEM. But I feel like what I had to say is important in that space. But once I leave the class, it's tiring to recreate that welcome feeling again in another setting. It feels like I have to start over in square one every time I enter a new space. How do I make change that is widespread, or is it even possible to make changes that is widespread? Trish, that is a phenomenal question. I almost want to copy and paste this and send this to our executive leadership team because it's perfect, it's poignant, and it really gets to the crux of what we're trying to do in this space. So thank you for that question. I'll turn it to the panel first. Is how do we do this? Because this work is tiring and it's laboring. How do you not have to start over? And as Trish stated, be in square one every time you enter a new space.
Trish, I'll answer it. I don't know if I have the perfect answer, but I do appreciate the question, and being most of us are, it is not uncommon for me and for those of us on this panel to be the only person of color at a table. It is tiring. And I want to say it takes a while to kind of get used to that. It takes a while to get used to that feeling, but don't give up. Especially as a woman in STEM, especially as a person of color in STEM. One thing that I would do if I was you is to talk to the professor about it, like to have a conversation to say, to kind of explain what it is that you are feeling so that your professor can be your ally now. And your professor can teach through a lens when he or she looks at you or when they see you in class, they are empathizing with that and possibly could take responsibility of some of that change off of you. I don't think the change will always be on you, and I don't think it's fair for
Right.
that change to be on you. But one thing that you can do is to build a relationship with a few people in class, and definitely to build a relationship with your professor, whomever he or she is, and let them know how you feel. You can write it in an email. You can set up time during their office hours and start building those kind of relationships, so your professor understands where you are coming from, or your professors
Mhm.
understand where you are coming from, and you can have that ally, or I'd like to say accomplice.
So Trish, I'll say my answer is probably a little less PC. Um, so as a woman of color, I change my hair all the time. So you might see me one week and it might be down to my ankles, and the next week, you could barely find it, right? And so what you find is when you're the only one in that space, my name hasn't changed. My hair might, but I could go to a meeting month after month after month after month and have individuals introduce themselves and reintroduce themselves to me every single month. And I'm thinking, well, I'm the only one that looks like me. Why can you not remember that it's me? And so what I started doing is, I'd say, well, Trish, we talked last month. You don't remember the conversation we had about X, Y, and Z? Or, I would walk up to them first before they could reintroduce themselves and say, well, hey, Trish, last month we talked about da 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 da. I wanted to follow up and see how that went, because now it forces them to remember who I am. It forces them to remember the conversations that we had, because it was important to me and I want them to know that it's important. But that whole reintroduction or recreating a feeling, it gets old. But sometimes you have to put people, just kind of pull them on the carpet and show them it's not me, it's you. You're the one that clearly can't get my name in your head, or the value that I bring to this discussion. So you have to show them I brought something to it and you missed it. Or you bring someone else in to say, hey, Dr. Baptiste, remember last month when we talked with Trish about X, Y, and Z? I thought that was an amazing discussion. And so if you're standing there looking at me like, I don't even know who you are, but Dr. Baptiste is like, yes, that was wonderful. Now you're going to pay attention. So you just have to make people pay attention sometimes and create just that feeling of, I'm important. What I have to say is important, and you're going to listen. And if you don't, you miss out, not me. So that's kind of a strategy that I've found early on in my career, that started to work in my favor.
I like that. You're our accountability agent, Dion, because you said this in another situation as well, where the onus and responsibility isn't on the person of color to have to do that laboring work every single time. So that's a great strategy to bring other people in and hold them accountable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Trish, I first of all, thank you for your question and your comment, and thank you for being willing to join this brave space with us. It's important that students like yourself get to experience this. And I wrote in the chat about just the phenomenal panel this is. I'm enjoying participating in it, but it's really for the benefit of folks like you. And so I just want to say that to you. So thank you for being an active participant with us. And thank you for the bravery and even putting something in the chat, because you could have just hung up from this call too. But so I appreciate you for that. Let me just say this: it's exhausting. It's exhausting. This work is not for the faint of heart. To be a person of color experiencing what we're continuing to experience, period, right now in this country, throughout the world, it's exhausting. I'll tell you a personal story. Um, when the um, Obviously, when we were quarantined and socially distanced at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, and then when the intersections of widespread racism um, continue to appear in ways that really challenge the spirit of, just our own humanity. I had so many days and so many moments where I just felt like, wow, is the work I'm doing even doing anything? Is it moving the needle? Is it big enough? Can can I do more? What can I do? Um, then if you intersect that with what you may be experiencing, how do I feel comfortable? Why do I have to always put in so much work? How do I um, get people to really see? I just want to say that all of us on this call can relate and we empathize with you. I do want to say to you that there is solidarity in the struggle, though. When I was a student like you, and I was the president of the Black Student Alliance, some of my strongest friendships and my biggest allies and supporters came from the unlikeliest of sources. They came from the Students in Alliance for Asian American Concerns. We joined forces on so many things that people thought were just Black issues. And then we partnered with the Women Against Rape. And then we partnered with intramural sports, fraternities, and sororities. And then we started partnering with some more like minded people as we began to build our own little village. At the end of my graduation, my tenure, I had like a little United Colors of Benetton team of people that were just all of these, the Indian cultural exchange. I was like a person who was a part of their first Diwali celebration at Emory University, right? It's all of these ways in which when you feel tired and you feel exhausted, if you have some community that can strengthen you and
Mhm.
help continue the fight for you. It's a big thing. I recently shared poetry. I did a little pop-up poetry event, and the poem was I'm blanking on the title. I just came up with the title, but this idea was like all of these things that were happening that made me lament, that made people feel bad. Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed, and John Lewis, C.T. Vivian, all the icons in our history are passing. What does that mean for women's rights? What does that mean for equality? What does that mean for Affordable Care Act? What does that mean? And so you're sitting here doing this work every day, and then all of a sudden, oh, you're just like one more bad thing, right? Historian John Meacham, Tennessee's own John Meacham, said in an address, he said, despair is sinful. He
Mm.
says, if you look at the lives of these great people, they remind us that even in the midst of despair, there is hope, right? He says Ruth Bader Ginsburg graduated at the top of her law school class and could not get a job when she graduated from college, from law school. Okay, couldn't get a job. She was a woman, she was Jewish, and she was a mother, couldn't get a job. What does she do? She lives her life, passes some of the is tantamount to some of the greatest litigation in American history, and is one of the most revered members ever to grace the Supreme Court, right? She couldn't get a job when she first started. So those things help me
Mm.
when I get down, when I'm discouraged, when I have those moments where I'm like, you know what, I can just peace out on this and just do something else, right? I am motivated by those types of things. I'm motivated by my village, which includes these three wonderful persons on this webinar as well. And I encourage you to lean in and try to find and identify that village. Um, it could be some of those same folks who supported you in what you were able to bring to that STEM discussion. It could be some folks. Now you got three new friends. You can
Mhm.
call us, email us anytime. We will stop for you. But I think just knowing that, yeah, it is hard. It is arduous. I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you. It is tiring, as Dion's not going to sugarcoat it. Stacy won't sugarcoat it either, even though she was very magnanimous with what she had to say. it can be very exhausting. But I would just encourage you to stay in the fight and keep doing what you're doing, because you're doing something right. First of all, you're here. First of all, you said something of value that was appreciated in that class. And that means if you spoke to that class and they heard you and they received you, you can speak to anybody.
Yeah.
You know, Barack Obama on the campaign trail often quoted the South Carolina state rep, who, when she came in the room and her voice changed the room, and he said, one voice can change a room. And if it can change a room, it can change a city. And so I would just say the same thing to you. Just be encouraged and stay in the fight. Ain't nothing wrong with you. You doing everything you need to do. You just keep doing it.
And if I'm not mistaken, Trisha's had perfect attendance. So this is our third of our webinar series, and she has been at every single one. She's followed up with me as well. So we've got a meeting, I think, coming up in the next couple of weeks. So one last question is, what do people not know about this work, and where is your hope? So what is it that people don't know about diversity, equity, and inclusion work, and where is your hope?
Can you all hear me? Yes.
Yes. Mhm.
What people don't know, some people don't believe in it.
Mm.
Like, yeah, some people don't believe in it, and you just gotta keep moving. And my hope is in Trish.
I like that, Stacy.
Yeah.
Mhm. I would say what people don't know is that anybody can do it.
Mm.
Have to be willing. Just step up to the plate. You can do it. You don't have to be certified. You don't have to have a degree in it. It's about basic humanity. Anybody can step up and do this work if you're passionate about it, if you're serious about change and you want everyone to have opportunity. Anybody can step up and say, I got it. And my hope, I have hope in just, sometimes it's hard to say what I have hope in. But my hope is one day that we could stop doing this work,
Mm.
right? That one day the light bulb just goes off and we could stop doing this. Because as Jonathan said, it's been called by many names over the years. The language, the name just changes. But my hope is one day our children have learned something to say, hey, we got this. We don't need a diversity program anymore. We just do it. We just live it. This is every day. This is normal. So let's normalize DEI.
Mm.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I tell people all the time, my job is to put myself out of business, right? Based on the current realities of our country right now, it's plenty of work for me and us as professionals, right? Because we don't seem to be getting it. And I would say that I think most people just don't connect with it is everybody's job. They
Mm.
don't understand how, whatever your work function is, it doesn't matter what your work function is, it doesn't matter what you do, who you are. There are some ways in which you can think about looking at your system and making it better based on where needs are. It's needs analysis and recognition at its core, right? And the other thing I think people um, don't know about this is it ain't a black thing. Again, I mean, I keep going back to that, and I hate to be so repetitive about it. Is people have racialized fear, and they are creating fear in the industry based on their unwillingness to recognize and account for history, to recognize it as fact, and to recognize that historical flaws and inequities were engineered to specifically create certain results. Those results are disparities, economic inequality, racism, all of those types of things. They were purposeful, right? We can be just as purposeful and intentional at eradicating it, right? And so I think if people knew that and they understood that we're talking about the vestiges of the need for this work being based on the historic discrimination, discriminatory practices, laws, policies that were embedded and innate in everything that has founded this country as we know it, right? Not even talking about the indigenous experience,
Mhm.
even getting into the history of how this country was formed in the first place, right? Those are facts. That's history. And what I don't think people connect with is the simple idea that in order to upset the balance of historical wrongs and inequities, we have to do something. And it's not just about, I don't, you know, I'm not racist, so I'm not this, I'm not that, right? Well, you can ask yourself the question of, um, look around the room, you know, who works in this company, right? What do they do? You know, how are we representative of the very country that we live and serve and are honored and fortunate enough to be able to live and work and serve in, right? If it's not reflective of every space that we enter into, it should be. And so that's what I think people really don't know and connect with and recognize.
Well, this has certainly been a phenomenal conversation. Thank you, Trish. Like, kudos to you for hanging with us this entire time. We really appreciate it. And to all those who are going to listen in later. So as we wrap up, I was taking notes and I'm writing and reflecting and saying that we need to look at our systems. We need to do a needs assessment on our systems. We need to challenge our systems. We need to change some of our systems. We need to keep our systems accountable. And we need to make these systems transparent using innovation, clear communication, and creating brave spaces for us all to connect. And in the process, we have to do it with respect, with love, and valuing each other. And ultimately, the driving force has to be humanity. So thank you so much to all of our guest speakers and our panelists today. We really appreciate your time, your energy. Bless you, Stacy, your energy and your insight. So thank you so much. You have their information in the chat. And when they say follow up, they really do mean that. So thank you again. And we look forward to seeing you on the next opportunity of Mocs Move Forward, a discussion of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So thank you to all and have a good evening.